What is going on, lovely people? What's your self-talk? All right, so today I am going to be talking about how to avoid purchasing a negative cash flow property. And give me a second while I get a couple of things fixed on this end. And some of the reasons why I wanted to touch on this topic today was because I realized as I've grown in purchasing real estate, there is a barrier that I think everybody has to understand how to avoid in order for them to get in a better place to find property that's going to be a positive cash flow property. And I've learned this the hard way, and my job is to come to you and give you a better way to be able to start analyzing properties and evaluating properties. And so if you don't make it through the full thing, in the comments below, I have a free cash flow sheet that I'm gonna talk about a little bit more in depth in this video today when it comes to avoiding buying a negative cash flow property. But what I want more than anything is that you get into this real estate realm and not only you take advantage of it, but you learn from the mistakes so that you can go faster. I've had the pleasure of helping a lot of people get in a better position when it comes to purchasing real estate, whether it's on my sales team or the investing side. And so I just want to continue to share that knowledge because what I'm reminded of is, to be honest, God has shown me that more people need to understand the mindset that you and your wife, and of course, let me back up if you don't know me. My name is Jabari McLennan. I've been in real estate investing for over 8 years. Me and my wife started in a very small town called Jonesboro, Arkansas. We've expanded that now in 3 different states. And we getting I've gotten to a place where God is just continuing to remind me, like, you need to understand, people need to understand how to not only get to that position, but how you can continue to grow from that. So my hope in this today is to show you exactly why you could get stuck and you can overanalyze so much. But as my mentor said, you learn a lot of things that you're doing, and I learned a lot. And to be honest with you guys, when I bought my first negative cash flow property, it was after we purchased over 20 properties. So let that sink in. We did not buy our first negative cash flow property until after our 20th door, I should say, not property, 20th door, because we count by the doors. And I think for people like yourself, if you say, hey, I want to start building this lakes through real estate, what does that look like? All right. So I got my whiteboard with today, and the first thing I want to highlight is when you are wanting to analyze properties, the thing you have to understand first and foremost is how. Now, how do you analyze property? It's very simple. You're going to take the property and you want to find what is the future rent. So if you know what the rent's going to be, you take that and for simple math, let's say the rent's going to be $1,000. Okay, so that's the rent. Now, next you say, well, what will the mortgage be? Now, just for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna say the mortgage is, in this case, um, let's say it's $400. Okay, and then we also have our reserve. So if I have my reserve, then I generally say, and it depends, it can be 10% or it can be 30%. And that really varies on if this is a stress property or if this is a new construction property. Because when you have something that's more new construction property, you don't expect much when it comes to repairs, maintenance, and oftentimes this is made up of the repairs and maintenance that comes with buying a property. So let's just say most of the time people end up buying the other stress property, and so we take 30% of the rent, so that'd be 300. Okay, so if I minus 1,000 from 400 minus 300, so that's going to give me 700. total between these two. So that means I'm gonna have a difference of $300 cash flow. If you ain't learned anything else now, it's that simple. Now go run with that and learn how to analyze a property. So, and then I have in below, it's a free sheet that walks you through this a little bit more in detail, like I'm doing today. And then you can use that as you start looking at properties, okay? So here's your rent, here's your mortgage, here's your reserve, and then this is what your cash flow. So this is considered a positive cash flow. Now I made it easy for a lot of you guys so that if you were to use the formula that I have, and I have an Excel sheet as well that I'll send you guys, start analyze those properties, you realize, okay, well, if this cash flow, then you need to move forward with the deal. But then there's so many other questions like, well, what do I offer the property? How do I know what my reserves are going to be? Second. All right. So, all right. So next step. Now we know how to analyze whether it's going to be a positive cash flow or not. So let's just say you looked at this same property, and when interest rates and everything where it's at right now, you're probably going to say, well, guess what? Let's go with $1,000, and let's say my mortgage is 700, and let's say my reserve is still 300, right? You have 7, 8, 9, 10. So your cash flow is actually zero if you kept it 30%. Now, you may look at that and say, I don't want that deal. Here's a couple questions you want to ask. Is this a new construction property? There we go. And is this a new construction property that I'm having issues with? I'm sorry, new construction property I'm not going to have issues with, but I still want to pick out the max reserve so that my cash flow is probably zero and I'm okay. This is what you call someone who is a equity purchaser, because all they care is that it's going to cover itself. But if it covers itself, the property, and you have the reserve coming out of the rents, you don't need to think about cash flow because you're okay with the work you have. You're not looking for immediate cash flow. And people do this because they understand the power of network equity, because over time what happens as a renter pays down the rent, you have more in equity, which you can leverage to help you purchase more property that's going to even cash flow more or give you more equity. Now at some point someone will cash out and start receiving monies money from the properties that they purchase, so keep that in mind. All right, so that's what you have here. Now let's go to the last example and say, all right, well, if I look at this property and let's say it's $1,000 in rent, you see that, and then let's say my mortgage is $900, okay, and my reserve is the same. So now we're going to have a negative. What is that? 200. 9. Yep, 200 cash flow. All right. Now we went from a sorry, having little issues with the audio today. So if I went from a a positive cash flow, which it wasn't negative, therefore it wasn't positive, it was just zeroed out, into now I'm at a negative cash flow. Now, this is keeping rent the same, keeping mortgage the same, keeping reserve the same. I want to teach the basic principles. Number one, you need to learn how to analyze properties in the beginning. And you can analyze any property just by going to the MLS, or if you have a real estate professional like myself, we'll send you the properties. If you want access to all the properties that's in your local area, make sure you message me or make sure you visit the link below, and I'll make sure you get properties that's in your area so you can know more of what you can start analyzing and use this formula. But when you start looking at the rents, start looking at the mortgage, start looking at the reserve, you realize, okay, if I can start finding these deals, that's going to cash flow $300, so it'll be zero. Hey, Kendall, she's in there. It's my niece. Um, so if you do the zero cash flow or you do a negative cash flow, here's the reality: is a lot of people right now in the interest rate market may find deals like this. And the thing that I wanted to talk about today is how to avoid these properties specifically. Why? Because you have to have a certain balance sheet and have a certain job to understand if you want to buy this property or not. All right. So here is where people mess up when it comes to buying real estate. Hold on one second. Let me get my towel. Okay. So we've seen those examples, right? Right. All right. Now, let's say you found that property, and the second thing you need to understand is the difference between short term and long term. Now, here's where most people, when they get into real estate right now, and then you have properties that's a high interest rate property, excuse me, the market have higher interest rate, and they want to try to justify the numbers by looking at short-term rentals, meaning Airbnb, VRBO. Now, if you are expanding your portfolio, I want to make something clear. I got to a point where we purchased our first short-term rental after like a 15th door, and it was great to have a foundation of properties, and that's what I hit on, and that's why I emphasize on with our zero down method when it comes to purchasing real estate. So if but and I'll get into that later, but let's get back to this point. So if you're trying to avoid purchasing negative cash flow on property, let's think about short term. Short term, you can look at the numbers today. You can go to different sites, VRBO. No, excuse me. AirDNA is one site. Oh man, I forgot some. They'll spit out a number for you, but it's very hard to be able to analyze. Hey, is that going to be a good property for me to purchase? How? Why in this? Why is it so hard? Short-term rental is very flexible. So let's say you have. I'm in one of the towns I'm in is Bryan-College Station. So this is a very big good. This town is real huge on football, Texas A&M, and so when you're in a college town and you want to look in the short-term rental space, well, you're going to have a high season and a low season. Now, this works in short-term rental regardless, and the market is very important. But let's say you have a very high season, meaning you have rents that's going to be much higher than your average. So let's say, for the example's sake, I said that example we just used $1,000. Well, let's say that that's what you can get in an average season. But let's say when it goes to a high season, let's go to high season, and you can get up to 2,500 a month in rent. Okay. Well, wait a minute. If I can purchase a property and I can look at the short term and get $2,500 a month, but then I can also look at the long term and get $1,000 a month. That's when you need to start asking yourself, does it work on both ends? Okay, because what I've learned is when you're buying a rental property and you're using short-term rentals as the first metric to determine if this is going to be a good cash flow property or not, I think from my experience, that is it's a bad scenario, right? Because when people are trying to get in a short-term rental, that is much more a hands-on job because you have a lot of turnover. You have to manage your cleaning crew. You have to answer questions to guests. Now, if you have a lot of automations, that's great, but you're going to need a lot of things at the very beginning to help you get your account up and running, which is fine and that's great. And once again, it really depends on where you're at in your journey in real estate investing. When we bought our first short-term rental, once again, it was after 15 doors. So we had the experience, we had the maintenance people, we had the cleaning people, and we had the relationships. We hired people that it worked out well. We hired people and it didn't work out well. We fired people. We made mistakes. And one of my biggest things is that you should always seek to do long-term rental before you go and purchase a property that is short-term, because this is, I think, the number one way not only you can avoid buying properties that is a negative cash flow, but also you can have less headaches in the beginning. Because once you're starting off and wanting to build a legacy of real estate, there's so many different things that you need to understand. In the very first way, term. So now let's go back to my scenario I was just talking about. Say, for instance, that you want to purchase a property and it's going to be 2,500. But what happens when it goes down? And let's say you analyze that property based on a $900 mortgage, and we're going to go over here, $900 for mortgage. For those I just erased, I'm going to put it back up here again. And then we say reserve. That's your mortgage. Now reserve, I say it was 30%. So we say 30% of that is $300. So $300. And for here, let me see, I think I said negative 200 cash flow. And oh man, minus 300. So it'll be 1,300. So this is short term. I know I got that backwards. So this is going to be, if I'm looking at a property that is short term, the high season, if I was to purchase it, and high season, like going back to the example how I'm using this, can be anywhere from August to December. Okay. So let's say you go from August to December, and this is say, hey, I'm going to get 2,500 cash flow. Now, if you're smart, what you would do, you wouldn't use this complete cash flow. That reserve, I will stack up your reserve super high, because guess what happens if you go to after December and you go to January. Uh, so in the short term realm, January, February, and March is the lowest season when it comes to having a real, having any type of short term rentals, and that's very difficult to not only maintain those type of properties during that time, but you have to be very more involved with the selection of tenants. You have to be involved with making sure you get some longer term people, which may mean, you may be in between the average and the high season, but you at make sure you're cash flowing. But this is something that you need to understand, is that if I'm purchasing a property and I cannot, I'm looking at this as my main metric, but I'm not thinking about this in my, like I said, for here you have August to December, but then you say, well, what happens in January to what's that, September? Oh no, I'm sorry, July? That is 6 months that you need to account for, that you're getting a negative cash flow on a property. And the reason you bought it was because you were focusing on a short term, and it does very well for a couple of months. And this is what I think when you hear a lot of ads, when people are talking about, getting And we had three of these properties. No, I take that back. In the beginning, when I first started off, we bought over five short-term rentals. We managed them. We self-managed, me and my wife. Um, we fulfilled them, broke up parties. I did everything in the beginning when we bought our first short-term rentals. So the reason why I did that, because what I learned from my mentor is like, listen, before you can pass anything off, you need to be involved. You need to be the person that understand what works and what does not work. Because if I decide I want to bring somebody else on, I need to understand. I need to. I can know what I need to expect. Right. Um, inspect what you expect. I think I said that right. Y'all throw it in comments if I got that wrong. But all that to say is, when I have this as my main thing, and going back to us starting off, this wasn't the very first property we bought. And that's why I think a lot of people can get a bad rap when it comes to real estate. And it's gonna go to my third point here in a second, but I just want you to understand, if don't be careful of buying a rental property and focusing only on the positive, short-term rental, which is great if you manage your money well and you go in great detail. This can work, but I want you to know that I think that's it's gonna take a lot. It's gonna take a lot of discipline, because the model that we did when we bought those first properties, we did a rental arbitrage. And like I said, we had five properties. They are always close together, great proximity, great area. And then from there we was able to break off and start purchasing the properties for ourselves. And then we own them instead of rental. So rental arbitrage, for those who are for X amount of time, so that I can um and landlord knows, like, I'm not doing anything shady. I never hid anything. I don't hide anything from when we were doing a short-term rental with the landlord. They knew what we were doing with it. So for those who was unethical and tell you to do that, I would stay away from those. I would never teach anybody to do anything when it comes to real estate that's unethical. So we didn't do any. We made agreement with the landlord. Say, hey, we're going to pay you X amount of rent, and then the difference we're going to keep. We made that agreement up front, and that put us to work. Okay, and so here is one of the things I use. So if you want to be able to understand how to do this cash flow analysis for any property you look at, in the description below, I do have analyzed properties. Okay, but that the last thing is, I think, that helps you understand what it's going to take to avoid purchasing a negative real estate property. So we said focusing on short term, uh-oh, short term and long term. And then three, I think, is your teacher slash coach. Now, when you are getting into real estate, I think the number one thing that anybody should do is make sure they have someone who's committed to where they want to go. So if I want to learn more about apartments, I'm gonna go hire or find a coach who is very good in apartments, or find someone who owns them, so that I can learn how they've acquired them and see if I want to do that exact method, or maybe I have to do it on a different scale. Or when it comes to flipping and wholesaling, as you guys know, I am not a wholesaler. I don't. Um, my model and method when I first started real estate was, what that meant for me was having something I could pass down to my kids, a physical asset in this case. And that physical asset just happened to be real estate. And I had very little money. So I always teach my zero down strategy on how we acquire over 20 properties. And if you want to make sure you learn more about those specific strategies, make sure you register at the link below. You get a free cash flow sheet, but then I'll continue to keep it updated, because I'm gonna have much more deep dive where I'm want to maybe help people and teach people how they want to do that. And if not, great. Just continue to come to Cashflow Friday, and I'll give you as much of the free gems as I can. Okay. But I think in how to be able to avoid a negative cash flowing property is hiring a teacher or a coach or being a group coach setting. And the reason why is because what happens, you need to keep your emotions in check. You need to be able to be aware of, like, if you're thinking illogical. Real estate is basic math. What happens is people get very emotional when they see properties, when they see what they can do to it, and they start getting outside of their realm on what they really need to focus on when you're purchasing real estate. And what a teacher and what a coach does, who's been in your shoes and who's farther along than you, they can not only check you but help you understand, hey, this is you need to be more mindful about not only one what you're purchasing, but making sure you're thinking about this in a very logistical way. I'll tell you this story about my recent mentees that we had. They were purchasing their first property with the zero down method that I teach. And like I said, make sure you get the link below. It's Cashflow. It's cashflowfridayagent.com/cashflow. You get a free cashflow sheet, and I'll let you know more about this training. But I was doing, they signed up for one of my one-on-one coaching. So I was literally hands-on with them to help them understand what they needed to do. And they oftentimes would reach out or during our calls ask questions that it was um, them being very emotional about the purchase, but they needed help thinking through it. Like even several opportunities came up, and I told them to ask certain questions when they say, "Hey, well, this is something that's going to be out of state. This is your first property, the one I think we agreed to, based on your goals, were going to be in your backyard, and you stuck with that." And then from there, understanding why you need to reevaluate the why behind this, because when they were purchasing or when they were looking at this, a family member came to them because they had a um it was going to auction, and so the emotions was high. I was like, hey, I understand all that, but family members or someone selling real estate, and you ask the question and say, man, like I want to know what to do, but I'm not in a position. And so all that to say, they end up finding a way to purchase a property, but it was after several conversations, having someone in the corner to help them think about this from a logical perspective. So um, Cash Flow Friday is just a reminder for you guys is that when it comes to a Friday, I want you to be able to have something other than your primary job that's paying you. And my goal to you is get you in a position where real estate is that other source of income that is paying you. Because not only one, this is what I've had experience over the last 8 years, I've also helped several people do this exact method that I teach in my zero down course. And so later this month, we'll have a more detailed training about that. And if you want to be part of the 10 spots that we're going to open up in my legacy real estate coaching course, and I want to dive into that a little bit more for those who are serious, committed, and say, listen, I don't want to end this year. I want to make sure I end this year with a property or a game plan to help me close on my first property or second property or third property, and figuring out a way to do it with zero down. And I'm gonna walk you through that. So thank you for taking the time out. If you want to know more about that, like I said, make sure you register at the link below. It's gonna be a free cash flow sheet. And I will make sure we stay in contact with you, and I'll message you to see, hey, if you're serious, let's talk, and let's say make sure you get you to the training so that we can take the first steps, and then go from there. So thank you for watching, and be blessed.